I stand before you this evening with a message of confidence, strength, and hope. 4 months from now, we will have an incredible victory.
He should have ended it right there. Well, welcome back to another edition of the Enough Said program. My name is Dan Barreiro. I'm the acerbic one. The voice of reason is Justin Gaard. And of course, I guess you could say the referee is Lori Fisher. Hi, Lori.
Just trying to keep the train on the track. Hi, guys.
You do.
Are we doing a 92-minute edition?
That would be better. Then you'd be the conductor.
This is a 90-minute edition
No,
today,
no,
right?
We're going
We
long.
could go 90 minutes.
We could.
I mean,
easily.
Trump did. We could go 90.
That's what I'm thinking. Let's carve out the time.
The Republican, I don't know, the news producers may have an issue with that. The Republican National Convention wrapped up on Thursday night with former President Trump addressing his crowd of supporters for, as we said, 90-plus minutes. The last 4 days have been anything but what we would expect after Trump was shot at a rally last weekend. We'll talk about that. He named his running mate for vice president, Ohio Senator J.D. Vance, and many of Trump's former rivals spoke this week, all coming back to that word unity. Dan?
We are living, if you didn't know it already, in rather absurd times. Remember that the Republicans were rooting for Joe Biden to do well enough in the debate that he would stay in the race because they think he represents their best chance to win. Last night, many Democrats, believe it or not, were actually rooting for Donald J. Trump to stay on the tracks better than he did so that would allegedly continue to discourage Joe Biden from thinking you're going to be able to actually stay in this thing. That's the craziness that we're living in right now, not to mention the conspiracy theory, and I know we are going to get to it later, reaction to the assassination attempt, in which a new poll I just saw this morning in Newsweek suggests that 1/3 of Democrats believe the assassination was staged.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing 1/3 to maybe more of the Republicans, of the righties, think
that Joe Biden did it?
That Joe Biden did it, or that the Secret Service wasn't just inept, but they were deliberately inept. Can it get any crazier than our current condition?
Other than Hulk Hogan jumping into the mix,
Perfect.
Dana White jumping into the mix, it had a WWE feel. I think the best thing I read about the final night of the speech, Dan, was like protein shake infused. You could bottle it up and sell it at GNC. That's how they rolled. The word unity got very precious this week. We've used it over and over and over again, and we saw how long did that last into the speech? An hour, 70 minutes, 80 minutes? I don't know exactly when it kind of went on the rails.
Well, when his teleprompter, I think, when his teleprompter froze and he had to start talking on his own.
Not as easy.
I think that's when things started going off the rails.
Yeah, so not surprising that they tried to keep him on that message as long as they possibly could, but we all kind of know who he is. We all kind of know how he rolls. It was fascinating, though, Dan, to think about the differences of conventions going all the way back to 2016, when the Republicans, as you remember, were very reluctant. They were not exactly thrilled that it looked like future President Trump was going to win the nomination. It was kind of just like a chill vibe going all the way back to Cleveland, I think. This most recent one was anything but that, with all the usual suspects there, all the key Trump players playing their role. J.D. Vance, I think, is a good pick for him. I think that's going to be very popular with the people that he's trying to kind of keep their trust and keep their vote. But, yeah, it was a wild ride, and now we get to figure out what Biden's going to do. I know we're going to talk about that as well.
So, yeah, what's interesting, again, is that we kept being told that not surprisingly, when you come within, a half inch or less of losing your life, that you might have an epiphany.
Be reflective.
And look, anybody, I mean, it's unrealistic to think he was going to come out there and suddenly be, a Democrat? Did Democrats think he was going to convert that far? No, but what we're looking for is, are you going to keep playing the same old hits? And ultimately, after a decent start, he did. And so we're back to crazy Nancy Pelosi. We're back to the cheating Dems stealing the election. And I'm in a room by myself looking around and going, it's exhausting already. We got that. That's part of, I think, what many of us think we do not want to have to deal with once again.
Let's keep going. The assassination attempt on Trump happened last Saturday at a rally in Pennsylvania. The shooter, a 20-year-old man with a rifle, was killed by Secret Service agents after firing 5 rounds. A volunteer firefighter in the audience was also killed. We also learned that U.S. authorities uncovered a plot by Iran to kill Trump. Dan?
Well, I don't think so far they've made any connection between this individual and the Iran problem, which is apparently legitimate. It was a horrific day. I think that's how I felt. I thought it was very traumatizing as the thing came together and we came to realize exactly what was being attempted here, regardless of how you feel about the candidate involved here. And the hardest part, I think, is you want to go down the road probably too fast of doing the evaluation of the security breaches.
Right.
But it was hard not to go fast when we learned as quickly as we did, as much as we did, that seemed to indicate a series of incredible blunders, enough warning that you'd like to think Trump could have been taken off of the stage. And when you have the now rightly beleaguered head of the Secret Service publicly uttering one of the most absurd, speaking of absurd again, statements I've ever heard out of somebody in charge of security. Well, that building, the roof is kind of slanted, and there's a safety issue there. Somebody texted us on the show and said, well, I'm here to protect the President of the United States at all costs, take a bullet,
right,
unless the roof doesn't fit OSHA standards
right.
for standing on it.
Sloped roof.
What are we doing here? So that was, I think, very quickly became part of the story that it could have been worse, obviously. And secondly, is this one of those cases where you say, well, yeah, there were a number of steps that could have been taken, that should have been taken to prevent even the tragedy that did take place, because you had an individual who was obviously shot and killed.
It was a horrifying day, because to think in 2024, with everything we know about guns, with everything we know about shootings, with everything we know about violence in general, that somebody could get that close to the president. And Secret Service, obviously, they have a tough job. It's the one they signed up for. You can't make mistakes when you're with the Secret Service, right? You can't have any bad days. Might be unfair, but that's what you signed up for. And when you start looking at all the graphics, Dan, and all the maps of that farm, you and I could have popped over to that farm and said, I think this building is one where it's probably a vulnerable spot. This building that's within hundreds of yards of the president, and you've got people in the audience that are noticing the behavior of the shooter as he's walking up, as he's sliding over, as he's on that sloped roof, all of that. And the police somehow can't find him, or the Secret Service somehow don't react quickly enough.
And several engagements, allegedly, ahead of time between either the cops or Secret Service agents and this individual before he even gets up to the roof.
And you did the disclaimer, regardless of how you feel about the individual that was at the podium. This is absurd. It's ridiculous, and it should be horrifying for all of us that something like this came so close to happen. Obviously, as you mentioned, somebody did lose their life, but I told you on the radio, I was just basically bummed out for the rest of the weekend, because you like to think that you have the right people in place to make sure that stuff doesn't happen. But even in 2024, at a presidential rally, someone can still slip through the cracks. It's very scary.
President Biden responded saying he continues to pray for Trump and his family. He also talked about how heated politics has become, and saying just because you must lower the temperature doesn't mean Trump will stop telling the truth of who Trump is, what Trump will do, what he plans to do. Biden also announced that he has COVID as more and more high-profile Democrats call for him to step aside. The Democratic National Convention begins August 19th in Chicago, Dan.
I don't know, people keep saying now the new deadline is it's going to be the next 3 to 5 days, and it's going to be at the end of this weekend. And more individuals are saying publicly what they've been saying privately. Does it have at some point a collective weight that gets the attention of the Biden family? Is money being shut off? Is that going to be the thing? I honestly still don't know. I'm not convinced he's going to say no. I do think, again, speaking of insanity, we're in a situation in which, as we saw again last night, it's the ultimate narcissist versus a sitting president who in an interview could not remember the name of his Secretary of Defense and referred to him as the black guy.
Right.
I mean, these are not choices. These are withering choices that at this point, frankly, no matter how you feel about either of them in terms of policy, we should not possibly be here. So is that enough? Is there ever any one interview where it goes, oh my God, even within the Biden family, we can't let the guy we love be in this position any longer. This is not fair to him or anybody else. And then, Justin, I'll ask you another question. If you convince him to not run for re-election, the next cry is going to be, well, it's 6 months till the next president is sworn to the oath of office. What about now? That's going to be the next hue and cry should he continue to serve at all.
Yeah, you brought that up earlier this week, and it's a good point. It's one I hadn't really thought of. And in the present day, it would be quicker to name the people that are currently standing by President Biden than the ones that have now called for him pulling out of the race, right?
Correct.
And by the time this show airs, it might be another half dozen. Shoot, he might even be out of the race. There were some rumblings that the family at least had started kind of talking about a way that they could do this thing gracefully here, maybe over the next 24 to 48 to 72
just not
hours.
tenable.
Well, the problem is, as we've talked about, is he needs to essentially throw a no-hitter one of these days. Because after the debate, which we talked about in the show, it's, okay, how does he get him back? How does he bring it back? The next debate is too far. That's September. That's too long. Too much water will be under the bridge. How can he do it? Is it with interviews? Is it with town halls? Is it with a press conference? Is it with high-level meetings? Is it bringing in, people like Schumer and Pelosi to talk them off the ledge? He can't do that. That's the problem. He needs to throw, whether it's fair or not at this point, he needs to be almost perfect, and he can't come close to doing that. And so the collective weight of it does eventually. That's why you're seeing so many people jump on the George Clooney side of this thing from a couple of weeks ago and say, it's time. We love you. You did a great job for America for basically half a century, but it's time to go.
Trump is cultural heroin. He makes some people feel better for a bit, but he cannot fix what ails them, and one day they will realize that. July 4th, 2016, J.D. Vance.
How about that?
Welcome back to Enough Said. Twins great Joe Mauer will be inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown on Sunday. He's the 7th twin and the 4th St. Paul native to get the honor, following Dave Winfield, Paul Molitor, and Jack Morris. Mauer played for the Twins for 15 years. Some of his big accomplishments, there's a long list, but 2009 MVP and 6-time All-Star. Justin.
Yeah, I'm oddly emotional about this whole thing, Dan, as you know, as someone who is Mauer adjacent, because I'm also one of us, unlike you. But he was one of those guys that you heard about before you ever saw him, and then you'd see him play baseball, you'd see him play football, you'd see him play basketball, and he was always the best player on the field. I know we're going to talk about
best athlete on the field.
Always the best athlete on the field, quite frankly, and and it's a storybook deal, right? Hometown kid, plays for one team his whole career, and it's been interesting to see how his career, at least nationally, because he's a first ballot Hall of Famer, which I don't think anybody was thinking when he kind of signed off and played catcher for a final time at Target Field in that emotional send-off, because as we know, he couldn't play the last few years because of the concussion worries. I don't know if a lot of people had him as a first ballot, no-brainer Hall of Famer, and that's what he became. And I'm trying to figure out if it's just you get enough separation from it and you say he was a catcher for the bulk of it. He was doing things as a catcher that nobody had done, not very often, in terms of the hitting and the batting average and the batting titles. And here locally, there's always going to be the what if type of thing. What if he was literally everything that we were told he was going to be coming out of Cretin-Durham Hall, which was 9-tool player, power numbers through the roof, was going to be back, behind the plate every game in the whole bit. It's kind of a complicated legacy in a way, but certainly a Hall of Famer.
He also provided us a soundbite that we might play
every day,
more than any other in the history of the Bumper to Bumper program on KFAN. It's frustrating.
It's frustrating.
And I don't remember when did he say it when Cuzzy blew the call about his hit down the line?
I don't remember, but it was in his Joe way. The reason why it stood out is because he wasn't throwing anything.
Exactly.
It was very understated. It's frustrating. That's about as angry as he would get.
I think that's part of, and it's unfair. He had to be who he is. He couldn't pretend to be fiery Joe Mauer. That wasn't in his nature. But I think baseball fans, sports fans in general, they tend to gravitate towards more animated players. You got more of that built-in, over-the-top, occasionally yelling, occasionally shaking the fist, and that's just not him. That's what he was a magnificent baseball
30
player.
seconds.
But as you said, I think the part of the reason there was a bit of a divide on him was he has the season, the MVP season that Lori mentioned. He finally hits, 28 home runs?
Something like that,
and
high 20s.
Everybody starts thinking, he's getting comfortable with his body. He's getting a little stronger. He's going to be now a power hitter as well. And he really wasn't the rest of his career. He really wasn't for any significant stretch of time. And I think that confused people a little bit. But in the end, like you said, enough distance went by. What was factored in, I think, largely was just how unusual it is to hit at all at the position that he played through at least the early part of his career, the most difficult position on the field, catcher.
4 Hall of Famers, as Lori mentioned, from St. Paul.
That's true.
That is wild.
It is crazy.
Cool.
And they all had Twins connections, which is also cool.
The Vikings signed first-round pick quarterback J.J. McCarthy to a 4-year contract, fully guaranteed, worth nearly $22 million. Meanwhile, wide receiver Jordan Addison was under arrest a week ago tonight. According to a police report, he was blocking a lane of traffic near LAX, asleep behind the wheel. Remember, he was pulled over last July in Minnesota, accused of going 140 miles per hour, blamed it on a sick dog, and said he wouldn't repeat that behavior again. Dan?
Well, I've been accused of being perhaps a little harsh. I've suggested on the radio that the Vikings should cut him. It doesn't appear they're going to do that, but we are in a situation here again where a player's ability is going to go a long way towards determining how far the Vikings and how patient the Vikings are going to be willing to be. I am watching closely, though, hoping that they're going to do more than just hide behind we're gathering more information and a couple of stern words at a press conference. What bugs me about this is these are two, it appears, different kinds of stories, alcohol only involved in one of the two. But it's even in the first one, the recklessness of potentially endangering other people with that level of arrogance. I don't care what age you're at. I don't buy that. Well, a lot of us did stuff like that when we were in our early 20s. I don't even, that's not enough of an excuse for me.
Right.
And that to me is a year after that to get caught in the situation he was in again. It does bug me, maybe even more than it should, and I hope they have a plan that goes beyond just saying a few words to buy everybody off on this thing, and I fear that that's all it's going to end up.
Well, on the age thing, I mean, to whom a lot is given, much is expected, right? I mean, whether you think it's fair or not, like, you are under the microscope. The standards are a little bit different for you when you're a public figure like that. And I would honestly say if I was Kevin O'Connell, if I was Mark or Ziggy, if I was anybody on that Viking staff, there's a lot of ways you can go with it. There's a lot of super talented, productive guys that have trouble early in their career making the right decisions, and they've got one of two choices. Yeah. They figure it out or they don't, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying he can be Chris Carter and turn into a Hall of Fame, wide receiver and one of the all-time greats, but that's an example, right, of a guy who needed to figure some stuff out, probably much more serious than this, but you get the comparison I'm trying to make. At some point, teams are going to run out of patience with you and go, it's not worth it to keep doing all these things. You're putting yourself in danger. You're putting others in danger. We have standards here that we expect everybody to live up to. And they talk a lot about that, right? They talk about accountability. They talk about collaboration.
30.
But at some point, you got to see some proof of it, where back-to-back summers now, really on your free time, when you're not with the team, you're making choices like this. And we never found out about the sick dog, by the way. Nobody ever got to the bottom of that, so I'm not sure I'm buying it.
In all honesty, this organization talks more than most about quote-unquote player empowerment.
Yep.
And the partnership. And that sounds good, and there's a place for it. But that's not what there's nothing touchy-feely.
Enough said.
There shouldn't be anything touchy-feely about the way this organization reacts. And that's what I'm hoping they will use this opportunity to say, yeah, we want to get along. We want the players to like us, but we have to take a stand on this sort of thing and get the point across about how much there is to lose here and how we're not going to tolerate it any longer.
Next up, a lot of loss recently this past week. Comedian, actor Bob Newhart died on Thursday, as well as broadcaster Lou Dobbs, 78. Actress Shannon Doherty died of cancer at just 53 years old, watching her on Little House on the Prairie, and Brenda Walsh on Beverly Hills 90210. Fitness guru and sweat into the oldies, Richard Simmons died just a day after his 76th birthday, and sex therapist and advice icon Dr. Ruth died at 96. Jeez. Dan.
That's quite a list. Yeah. Very disparate characters there in that list, and all influential to the pop culture in various ways. I spend the most time talking about Bob Newhart, who we were lucky enough to have on the show when he came into town for a comedy festival about 5 years ago. At the time, he was 89.
Right.
And he was, again, remarkably lucid for somebody of that age, and in sort of laying out his history. I always have felt, to a certain extent, he's an underrated comedian because there's nothing, over the top about his style. It was almost this understated, everyman, deadpan approach, very subtle to it, but very brilliant. And I know he won a lot of awards, but I always liked the fact that, he wasn't a particularly overpowering presence, right? At all. He's just a little guy who just kind of spoke these words and in clever fashion, but just on the basis of approach, intonation, whatever, who had a hell of a run, and so it's and had some very successful TV shows as well.
You had to listen to him. That's what I like about guys like Bob Newhart is you have to pay attention, because if you don't pay it, they're not going to hit you over the head with it, right? Like Richard Simmons would, for example.
Yes, he would.
Like we talk about the personalities, the differences there. I mean, some heavy hitters, some icons here that we lost this week. Simmons came right out, and you knew exactly what was coming, right? Whether it was on his exercise videos,
subtle as a sledgehammer.
Yeah, whether it was on the Letterman show. I mean, just his entrances in the Letterman show were, I think, worth the price of admission before he and Dave would get each other going. But with Newhart, you had to pay attention, or the joke was going right by you.
Justin, did you say? I'm trying to remember. Did you say on the radio when we talked about Dr. Ruth Westheimer that you learned about the birds and the bees from her? Is that because, I mean, again, she had great value for a lot of people.
I'll say this. I know who I didn't learn it from, my parents. So her guess would be, I'm sure I learned something.
Yeah.
It's just somewhere buried in the back of my head. And I was an old radio nerd, so I was always listening to radio shows. So I'm sure whether she knew it or not, she was educating me, much to the chagrin.
She opened the door, man, talking about stuff no one else was talking about until her.
For the land of the free.
Welcome back to Enough Said. It was tough to listen to the awful rendition of the Star Spangled Banner at the MLB Home Run Derby Monday night. Time for the lightning round. Country singer and Grammy-nominated Ingrid Andress admits she was drunk, apologized, and said she was going to rehab. The story went from making fun of her to just being sad. Dan?
No, I read a story just this morning that her music sales are through the roof.
Yeah.
So I guess we
Infamy.
shouldn't be surprised. We look for fame or infamy. I hope she gets the help she needs, if indeed that is the story. I stuck up for her a little bit, and I got ripped for it.
You did until you heard Carl Lewis, and then because we were putting her in the same category as Carl Lewis and Roseanne.
Yeah.
Next
Which
up.
is unfair because they aren't real singers.
The
But Carl's was pretty good.
Yeah, Carl's
I think
Take
better.
on the Milwaukee Brewers this weekend at home. We also learned on Thursday they'll have the earliest opening day in franchise history in 2025, March 27th, St. Louis.
The question is, will the game be on Bally when we start the 2025 season? That's the question.
Yeah, we know that no game. Well, we know they're on Bally now. Most people can't watch.
Well, right.
them.
I guess that's a better way to put it.
Yeah, where will they be? I saw the commissioner at the All-Star game is basically pumping the MLB package and saying, "Let us do the games. You won't get as much money." Does he know the Pohlads? Is he familiar with the Pohlad family? You won't get as much money. Do you think they're going to take that?
The Lynx don't play again until August 15th due to the Olympics. The Indiana Fever and Caitlin Clark beat Minnesota last Sunday. Dan was there. And then Clark broke a WNBA record on Wednesday against the Wings for assists in a game. Dan?
Justin was there as well. Nightmare scenario for Sarah Reeve.
Yes.
The woman who before the game was bored with any questions that might come that were related to Caitlin Clark. Acknowledged her, I think, a little more after, right?
Yeah.
It was my first Caitlin Clark experience on that level, and it was absurd.
A massive.
By the way, absurd in a good way as opposed to the politics.
Yeah, a lot of people there. A massive IT outage grounded flights today, knocked banks offline. It was quite the scene at MSP Airport with cancellations and delays, Justin.
A lot of people have said this, and I agree with them. It's a little unnerving, I think, Dan, that the entire world can basically be shut down by somebody or some company not installing the right update or having a glitch in their software, that so many things can be paralyzed.
He slept in. One guy we're going to find out who slept in and didn't flick a switch.
Has anyone heard from Bob?
Does he still have his job?
And no one can fly. You got doctors that can't do surgeries. The whole thing
And finally.
Well, now you know why people warn about terrorism possibilities.
I know. That's why it's
real.
unnerving.
Yeah.
I'm sure our Secret Service is on it.
According to the World Population Review, the happiness scores are out for 2023, and Minnesota placed third for smiles after Hawaii and Maryland. Dan, Hawaii, number
Thank you
one.
for throwing it to
No
Dan.
surprise, on that. We're third for smiles?
Yeah, well,
we're just third for happiness.
I just said
Happiness,
smiles,
I
another
see.
word,
Yeah. That's a little high for us, I think.
Okay.
I
Justin?
responded, we're third for lying. There's no way that we're third most happy. I cringe for the other states if we're really
But we want to
high.
believe it, and
That's
Lori
it.
Fisher especially
I know.
needs
And
to
we're
believe.
always all smiles on this show.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Enough said. You can catch us on the Fox Local app. All the episodes are free. You can also see lots of other goodies there, too.